That's what the judge said. I walked out of that courtroom with a yellow slip from Adult Protective Services that read, "No action warranted. Competent. Capable. Mine." Hard to believe it started with a birthday pie and a manila envelope. They slid it across the diner table like a gift. Tabs in neon. Durable power of attorney. Temporary guardianship. "Sign it, Mom." I looked at the candle, blew it out, and said, "Not on my birthday." That's when the quiet part got loud. A tour booked behind my back at Golden Pines. A checklist on my refridge that included sell car. And phone calls that sounded like care, but felt like control. So I opened a notebook and made 2 columns. What I owe. What stops tonight. I closed the emergency account, chose my own power of attorney, my sister, met a lawyer who speaks plain, and when APS knocked, I poured coffee and showed them the truth. Bills paid, pantry stocked, calendar and ink. They left me that yellow slip, my hall pass. Then the big one landed, guardianship petition. They said I was confused. I took the tests, drew the clock, and brought my life on paper. The judge read it all and looked at me. I looked back steady. "Guardianship is not a shortcut for control," I said. She agreed. And if you want to know how a 70-year-old woman kept her life, start with the envelope, the pie, and the word no, said with a period. The bell over the door jingled, and in walked my son Nate, 35 now, with a jawline that looks like his father's and photographs I no longer keep on the living room shelf. He waved and jogged 2 steps like he does when he's late and trying to make it look like he isn't. Kelsey followed behind him, her lipstick sharp, her hair ironed so straight it seemed like one wrong turn on a humid day would snap it. "Happy birthday, Mom," Nate said, leaning in for a hug that smelled like aftershave and antifreeze. He works HPAC when there's work, lays laminate floors when there isn't, and says he's between contracts the rest of the time. "70 looks good on you," Kelsey said, not sitting until she'd slid a manila envelope onto the table and lined the salt and pepper shakers into neat soldiers against the napkin holder. She smiled like people do in insurance commercials. "We brought something helpful." The waitress came back with a slice of peach pie with a stubby candle stuck right in the crust. She sang the last 2 words of happy birthday under her breath because in here, birthdays are mostly for toddlers and men who make a production out of it. She winked when I blew out the candle and said, "Live as long as you like and never want as long as you live." Then she set down the pie and left us to it. I reached for the envelope because that's what you do when someone offers you a gift even if the gift doesn't feel like yours. Inside were papers with my name typed in neat blocks, durable power of attorney, healthcare proxy, an application for temporary guardianship with boxes already checked, lines for signatures flagged with cheerful neon tabs. "I'm fine," I said, heat climbing my neck. "I drove here." "Exactly," Kelsey said, tapping the form where she had already filled in my address as if that proved something. "You shouldn't be driving, not alone, not at night, and not to places that don't have street lighting. We're just trying to get ahead of things. It's practical. The best gift you could give us is to stop fighting change." It didn't sound like "I wish you'd die," the way some people get blasted with a cruel sentence and never forget the echo. It sounded like suffocation, like someone holding a pillow over your face while smiling for the family Christmas photo. Nate reached for the syrup, like sweetness might help. "It just makes appointments easier, Mom," Thanks, doctors. You won't have to remember all the logins. We can handle stuff. You can relax. I'm not a login, and I have a calendar. Everybody says that right before things slip, Kelsey said, the corners of her mouth not quite up to the words. We booked a tour at Golden Pines on Friday. Not now, not right away, just to see. It's a lovely place. There's a koi pond. Not today, I said, sliding the envelope back across the formica. It made a papery hiss, quiet but final. Not on my birthday. Nate's jaw worked. Don't make this harder than it has to be. I carried mail through 3 blizzards and 1 April where the rain came sideways for a week, I said. I can do hard. I'm not signing. Kelsey folded the envelope like a napkin you're done with. We have to be adults about this, she said, then smiled at the waitress when she brought pancakes as if there were 2 versions of her, one for public consumption and one for my side of the table. We ate without saying much. The pancakes were dry because I forgot to ask for extra butter. When I got up to leave, I put my hand on Nate's shoulder, the same one I patted when he was 5 and we sat on the curb outside the dentist's office because he made it through without biting anyone. He flinched, a small gesture like a horse's ear twitching. Love you, I said out of habit. He nodded like a man conducting a transaction. Text when you get home so we know you didn't. He stopped himself. So we know you got in okay. Sure, I said, and walked out into bright Ohio sun that made everything look flatter than it was. I drove the long way home because there's a stretch of Hilliard-Rome Road where the houses give way to a scrappy field and a water tower, and if you time it right, the radio plays an old song you danced to in socks in the kitchen. It didn't come on. The news did. The newscaster said a storm was stalled over the plains and something about corn futures I never understood. On the way, I tried to do the thing where you take deep breaths and let your mind empty like the meditation lady on YouTube says. It didn't. It calculated instead the way my brain has always had when someone mentions money or a due date. I started a ledger on the steering wheel in my head. $18,600 for Nate's HVAC program when he decided college wasn't for him and the school had a new fast-track option that didn't qualify for the grant. $12,300 for the wedding reception when Kelsey's parents hit an unexpected recession, their words, and it seemed mean to serve grocery store sheet cake in a fire hall. $22,000 for the townhouse down payment, $9,800 in daycare checks, and another $1,700 in deposits to hold their spot during COVID because Kelsey said a good daycare is harder to get into than Yale. $1,200 for car insurance the summer their policy lapsed while his truck sat with expired tags. Groceries, gas, braces consultations that went nowhere. Piano lessons Kelsey swore would make Ava more disciplined, which lasted until basketball sign-ups. By the time I pulled into my carport, I was at $70,000 without touching the little things that add up precisely because you call them little. My duplex is off a street lined with cracked sidewalks and maple trees fat with summer. The neighbor's kid rides a scooter and loops until dusk, and Dot, who lives to my left, waters the same row of hostas she hates because her sister dug them up for her and she won't throw away anything that was given with good intentions. I unlocked my door and went straight to the kitchen for water because hard news always dries out my mouth. A piece of paper was clipped to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a strawberry. I recognized her handwriting. Kelsey has a way of pressing so hard with a pen you can read her to-do lists in the indentions, like Braille for people who don't want to listen. Golden Pines move-in items, primary care records, medication list, copies of insurance cards, toiletries labeled, comfortable shoes, robe, favorite mug. Underlined, sell car. My phone buzzed, a number I didn't know. Hi, is this Linda Carter? We're calling to confirm your tour at Golden Pines Memory Care this Friday at 10. Your daughter-in-law said you'd be joining her. If you need directions, cancel, I said, the word bigger coming out of my mouth than it felt in my chest. I didn't schedule that. "Of course," the woman said, in a voice that had been trained not to argue. "We're here whenever you're ready." I turned the magnet around so the strawberry faced the fridge and the clip showed, bare and ugly. Then I made tea, even though it was hot out, because tea is my ritual when I need to think. I got my shoebox of important things from the hall closet: passport, social security card, the paid-off title to my Impala, my late mother's rosary, even though I go to a Methodist church now, and my spiral notebook, the kind with a red margin line, because I am no good at important thoughts unless there is a place to corral them. On the top line, I wrote what I owe versus what I give away. Halfway down, I wrote a second title: What Stops Tonight? Closed the emergency joint account I opened when they had the baby and cried in my living room about daycare wait lists and colic. Remove myself as the backup payer on their utilities because a grown man can call the water department like anybody else. Choose my own power of attorney, my sister Ruth, who still lives in Cincinnati and speaks plain. Call an attorney who does more than wills printed from the internet. Stop being the person everyone assumes will pick up the slack because she always has. At midnight, I washed my mug, turned off every light, and slept hard, the way I used to after Christmas packages when my thighs burned from stepping in and out of a truck 400 times, and I'd still wake if the wind shifted like it was calling me by name. Morning meant action. I dressed in jeans and my USPS retired neither wind nor rain nor negativity t-shirt because the joke steadied me. First stop, First County Credit Union, where the tellers know that my name is spelt with an I and not a Y, and Mary Ellen, the branch manager, remembers my birthday without looking it up.
"I'm here to close a joint account," I said at her door. "The one I opened for emergencies that aren't emergencies anymore." She looked at my face, then at the screen. "There's $6,400 in there, Linda." "That's my rainy day money," I said. "It's raining." The sound of a cashier's check sliding across laminate is soft. The meaning is not. From there, I drove to the county courthouse, the building with the wide steps and the coffee that tastes like burnt toast in a paper cup, where the security guard asks every woman over 60 if this is their first time through the metal detector, even if he's seen us every election day for a decade. I'd called ahead and made an appointment with an attorney I found through a friend from church, a woman named Tanya Ruiz, whose website had no pictures of fake gavels and a long list of plain language resources. Her office was a shoebox on the second floor with a view of the courthouse lawn and 2 spider plants that looked invincible. She shook my hand like she meant it. "Tell me everything," she said. I did. The diner, the envelope, the memory care confirmation, the checklist on my fridge that felt like someone had let themselves into my life and rearranged the furniture without leaving a note. The years of shouldering, the little humiliations I told myself were kindnesses. Her pen skated like a dancer. "You're lucid," she said when I paused to breathe. "You're living independently. You handle your bills. You drive. You've got your own primary care. You volunteer at the West Side Free Store. You read to second graders at the elementary school. You're not confusing the microphone with the television remote." "I fixed my own toilet chain," I said, "because detail matters." She smiled. "We'll draft a revocable living trust. You choose your successor trustee, Ruth, and we'll create medical directives and a limited durable power of attorney that doesn't hand anyone a blank check. We'll set up an education fund for your grandkids that they can't touch until they're 25, and we'll send a letter to every third party who thinks they have a shortcut into your life. All previous permissions revoked." "What about the townhouse?" I asked. "I co-signed the refinance when Nate was between jobs one winter. They promised it was just to tide them over." "We can withdraw your consent to act as a guarantor for any future refinancing or credit extension," she said. "You can't unsign the past, but you don't have to strap yourself to the train forever." On the way out, I passed a woman at the vending machine crying into a napkin. I didn't ask what was wrong because strangers ask for stories they don't want to hold. I gave her the quarters from my pocket and said the only true thing I had in that moment. It gets different, I told her. Maybe not better right away, but different is a kind of better. The phone started up before I hit my driveway. Unknown number. This is Adult Protective Services following up on a concern about potential cognitive decline. Another unknown number. Golden Pines again. We just wanted to make sure we canceled the right tour. Nate. Mom, where are you? Kelsey is crying. Kelsey. This is just paperwork. Why are you being dramatic? Ma'am, the APS caseworker said when she arrived that afternoon, polite as a librarian. We got a report. Come in, I said, because hiding makes everything look worse than it is. Coffee? She sat at my kitchen table, took off her light jacket, and pulled out a checklist. Some things in this world are still done on paper with the ballpoint pen. It calmed me, seeing boxes that could be ticked like this was a school form and not my life. She asked if I was aware of my current medications. I handed her the list I keep taped inside the spice cabinet door. Lisinopril, calcium, multivitamin, ibuprofen as needed for knees. I walk 3 times a week. I don't always want to, but I do it. Do you have steady income? I slid over my bank statements, bills with paid stamped on them, my pension stub from the federal government that shows up direct deposited like it has since the day I quit wearing a uniform. I also do pies for the church bazaar, and sometimes people press money into my hand for them. I don't report pie money. Is that a crime? She smiled. No. I showed her my pantry. Not because she asked, because I wanted her to see that I keep rice, beans, peanut butter, canned tomatoes, and 3 emergency jars of spaghetti sauce, and that I buy fruit when it's in season and freeze it in baggies. My house is clean, and there's a calendar with blocks filled in for dentist in August and hair trim in 2 weeks and senior center line dancing on Mondays because Dot drags me. When we were done, she wrote, "No action warranted," on her form, tore off a yellow copy, and handed it to me like a hall pass. Would you like me to send a letter to your family stating that you're managing your own affairs? Sometimes that slows people down.
Yes, I said, pressing my fingers around the yellow carbon like it contained a spell. Sometimes paper is how you make room to breathe. That evening, the text softened, then sharpened. We're just trying to help, Kelsey wrote. We can't cover daycare if you pull your help, she wrote 30 minutes later. Thanks for putting us in a terrible position. Nate, you'll be lonely when you break the family like this. I boiled water and wrote my own letter, the kind that doesn't evaporate when a phone dies. I didn't try to be clever or kind beyond what was true. Nate, I love you. I will not finance or sign what I cannot control. You are an adult. I am not your plan B, C, or D. When you want relationship and not access, my porch light is on. If you need childcare, there's a list of licensed sitters on the fridge. Yours, not mine. Mom. I printed it, put it in an envelope, and mailed it because I know how people treat texts. Paper matters. It sits on a table and asks to be read again when tempers quit. I didn't leave the state or the country or even the time zone. I moved 2 hours south to Yellow Springs because at 70 you can still choose a new zip code if you let yourself. The first time I visited in college, the sidewalks felt like they were poured for people who look up at trees. There was a co-op where apples still smell like apples, a Saturday market where men with beards argue kindly about beets, and a co-housing community called Bluebird Commons with a notice board full of potlucks and yoga and someone looking to borrow a ladder on Wednesday. I sold the duplex to a nurse who wanted a shorter commute. I called a guy named Ron with a truck and God Blesses Me painted on the tailgate to haul what I didn't want to new lives. 2 bookcases to the church, an ugly lamp to a student apartment, winter coats I'd kept for years just in case, to the shelter where women pick carefully, like they're shopping for their future selves. I kept my dining table because it's where I taught Nate times tables, and my pie plates because a person should be known by a few good pies. Closing day smelled like new paint and possibility. Ruth drove up from Cincinnati with a clipboard because she likes to pretend she's in charge of things I'm perfectly capable of handling. She hugged me in the echo of my empty living room. "Good," she said. "About time you loosened your grip on other people's steering wheels." I said, "I'm not sure I ever held them. I think I wrote in the back seat and paid for gas." We laughed. It wasn't the bitter kind. Bluebird Commons gave me a ground floor unit that looked onto a common green where people drag Adirondack chairs out in the evenings and argue about whose tomato plants are the show-offs. Jeanette in 5B put a watercolor sign up on my door with a note that said, "No experience required. Actually, it's better if you've never tried." Merlene in 3Cs slid me her stack of New Yorkers and a sticky note that said, "Read the cartoons first. It's always the best way in." I bought a basil plant I didn't need and a bird feeder because the woman at the hardware store said house finches will come whether you deserve them or not. I slept that first night with the windows cracked and woke up to a train I couldn't see, just the low hum like a promise that the world was bigger than my old life. The legal things settled around me like furniture finding its final place. Tanya read every line of the trust out loud in her office while I took notes in the margin, because I never learned to let someone else be in charge of words that have my name on them. The Grandkids Fund is $10,000 each, disbursement at $25, with a narrow exception if there's an emergency related directly to education or health verified by a third party. They can't get the money because they want a spring break in Cancun. You good with that? I am. If they want to call me at 26 and tell me I'm a dinosaur, they can do it knowing I didn't fund their mistakes. We sent letters to banks and doctors and anyone else who had slipped into my file like a burr on a pant leg. We revoked old forms people forget they signed in the haze of a hospital discharge and grief. We told the mortgage company I would no longer be a guarantor for anything now or later, free and clear and final. APS mailed me their letter. Case closed, no action warranted. Sometimes government gets it right and writes the right number of words to say what needs saying. I thumbtacked it to the wall next to my retirement pin and the Polaroid from 1987, where I'm holding a stack of Christmas mail with a grin so wide it looks like I either won the lottery or had 3 hours of sleep. Both were true. Bluebird Commons has a community kitchen with a chalkboard where people write what they're making and how many mouths they can feed beyond their own. The first Thursday, I wrote 2 pies, chocolate chess and lemon meringue, 5 slices for whoever needs the sweetness. The second Thursday, I added a heart because it felt less like bragging and more like a love note meant for strangers who might become people I wave to at the mailbox. Saturdays, I sold pie at the market under a cardboard sign I lettered with a marker. Linda bakes what she likes. I didn't haggle. I charged $5 a slice and put a jar with a handwritten label that said pie money in front of me like a joke. People laughed and put in more than I asked. One man said the crust tasted like Sundays at his grandma's. I told him a crust is just flour, fat, and cold courage. In September, Nate called from a number I didn't recognize. I answered because fall makes me hopeful. People behave better when there are pumpkins on porches.
"Mom," he said, skipping hello the way he used to skip the last step off the school bus, "the bank won't approve our refinance without a stronger guarantor, and daycare is killing us. We can't keep this up. You know how expensive everything is. You raised me on less." "You need a budget," I said, not unkindly. "There's a free class at the library on Saturdays that uses envelopes the way Grandma did. It's boring, and it works." "You're really doing this?" he said. "You're choosing strangers over family." I'm choosing not to be a credit line with a heartbeat, I said. I'm choosing to be your mother, not your sponsor. That's the only way we have a chance at a real relationship later. He hung up. A minute later, a text from Kelsey popped up. Fine, we'll figure it out without you. 10 minutes after that came another. Just so you know, if we lose the townhouse, it's on you. I put my phone face down on the counter and rolled pie crust because hands understand before hearts do. Dot knocked, holding a bag of apples from a U-Pick she goes to with her sister every year, even though they bicker the whole time. We peeled and talked about nothing important, because sometimes that's the only way to survive the important things. In October, a certified letter from their bank arrived at my new address because Tanya told them where to find me and what to send. It said in dense paragraphs that the refinance was canceled for lack of a qualified guarantor and that the current terms would stand. It said other things lawyers like, hereto, aforementioned, notwithstandings, words I respect from a distance but don't invite to dinner. November, there was a voicemail from Nate at midnight. He sounded the way he did when he was 12 and got caught taking a pocket knife to school because his friend said it would make him cool. We're going to be late on the mortgage, he said. They're mean in those letters. He sniffed, then tried to make it into a cough. I thought you wanted us to be stable. I do, I said into a silent kitchen after I erased his message because I don't keep things that rot. I want you to be stable enough to stop looking at me like a safety net and start looking at each other like a team. December, I put up a small tree with 12 ornaments because that's all the new place needed. I baked 4 pies for the church to sell at the Christmas fair and brought one to the firehouse because my father always said you feed the people who will show up when everything is burning. Christmas Eve, I watched the Buckeyes game with Dot, and we yelled at the television like it could hear us. I put a plate of cookies on the counter, even though nobody was coming. I didn't cry. Missing is not the same as regret. I missed the version of my son who used to fall asleep in the back seat with chocolate milk drying on his upper lip like a mustache. I didn't miss the version of me that said yes to things that ate me alive. January got brittle and then cozy, the way Ohio winters do if you have good socks. I made friends at Bluebird Commons without sentimentalizing it. We are people who know the cost of aspirin and where to get 3 prescriptions filled for the price of 2. We are people whose knees tell the weather. We are people who know when laughter punctures a day like a needle letting pressure out of a boil. Jeanette painted a cardinal on a piece of scrapwood and hung it on my door with a string. Marlene knocked at 9 every night with the crossword section and stayed until the last clue was solved or we were both yawning so hard we cried. In March, Kelsey texted a photo of the kids at a YMCA basketball game with no caption. I saved it. It's one of those phone pictures that blurs motion and catches a mouth mid-yell. In April, Ava messaged me from her dad's phone. Grandma, I got a solo in the spring recital. Can you watch on FaceTime? I typed back so fast my thumbs fumbled. I wouldn't miss it. Break a leg. Figure of speech only. She laughed an emoji. Then she asked if sequins make you sweat and whether her hair should be in a bun or a ponytail. I told her what my mother told me the time I panicked in the church choir loft and ran to the bathroom to cry. When the lights come up, sing to the very last row, even if it's just Mrs. Beasley with her hearing aid off. That way, you know you did your part. The townhouse slipped. They didn't tell me. A friend at church who works at the county clerk's office said she saw it on a list. Past due. Notice filed, a sale date way too close to the start of the school year if anyone cared about the kids' feelings. It sat in my chest like a stone I couldn't swallow or spit. In June, Kelsey called, voice rubbed raw. She said, I was scared, skipping hello, her pride stepping away just enough to make room for me. Money, schedules, your health, we wanted control. I know, control and care wear the same coat sometimes, but they aren't the same. She said, we lost the townhouse. We're in an apartment near the bus line. Nate's picking up extra shifts. The kids share a room.
I thought you'd be happy we're finally learning consequences. I don't celebrate hard lessons. I'm glad you're standing up on your own legs. She said, there's a church picnic Sunday. If you want, the kids would like to see you. I'll meet you at the park. Public place, easy out if anybody gets mean. It was 90 degrees and humid enough to curl the hair of angels. We sat on a splintering bench under an oak that rained tiny bugs if you looked up. Ben showed me his plastic dinosaur and made the sound he believes they made, which is mostly a growl with a soft ending. Ava sang the first 2 lines from her recital and blushed so hard her ears turned pink. Kelsey stood 2 feet away and didn't interrupt. Nate waved from across the lawn, his hands full of a folding chair and a cooler he probably borrowed from a neighbor. He didn't come over. Sometimes it takes more courage to cross grass than it does to cross a country. Before I left, I handed an envelope to Kelsey. This isn't money, I said, because history matters and clarity is a kindness. Inside was a copy of the Grandkids Fund page in the trust with their names blackboxed because I'm not interested in being anyone's spectacle. On a sticky note I wrote, when they're 25, tell them their grandma believed in adult choices. She blinked hard and said thank you, with her mouth not quite letting the word out. Thank you for not punishing them for our mess, she said finally. I'm not punishing anyone, I said. I'm living like my life is mine. Summer slid into a kind of peace I didn't know how to live in at first. I bought a straw hat at the thrift store and got a sunburn line anyway. I took watercolor seriously and then not seriously at all. And when Jeanette said to stop fighting the water, I laughed because that was my entire life in 4 words. In August, a fat envelope arrived from the probate court. I felt weak before I opened it because bodies know before brains catch up. Inside was a petition for guardianship filed by my son, alleging increasing confusion and unsafe behavior, including driving errors. There were 2 affidavits attached, one from an urgent care doctor who'd seen me for a sprained wrist last winter, and one from a neighbor in my old place who said I sometimes left lights on. There was a hearing date. There was my name typed in a font that made me look like a file folder. I called Tanya, my mouth full of cotton. I'm trying to put me in a box, I said, and my voice did the small shake I despise. We'll answer, she said. We'll request an independent assessment. We'll bring your APS letter, your bills, your volunteer supervisor. We'll bring Dot if she'll come. She paused. This is ugly, and it's also sometimes the only way people learn what the courts are and aren't. We'll bring you. That's usually enough. The neuropsych exam took 3 hours in a beige room with a pot of plastic ficus and a woman in a floral blouse who asked me to remember 5 words, draw a clock, repeat numbers backward, and explain a proverb I've known since I could read. I passed. Of course I passed. My brain is a steel trap for things that matter and a sieve for the name of the actor in that movie everyone quotes. The report said I was fully competent to manage my own affairs. On the day of the hearing, Ruth drove and held my hand at red lights. We navigated the courthouse like it was a fairground, each of us pointing at the booth we would win the stuffed animal from. The judge was a woman my age, with hair pinned back in the kind of bun ballet dancers and librarians share. APS sat behind us. Tanya spoke in full sentences with verbs and evidence. Nate's lawyer said the words sons say when they're trying to wear concern like armor. He said, our client is only acting out of love, and her finances are of concern. And there was an incident in a parking lot, which turned out to be the time I forgot where I'd parked at Meyer because I'd been replaying a voicemail in my head. The judge looked at me, the way people look at birds to see if they're injured. I looked back steady. She said, Miss Carter, do you understand what a durable power of attorney is? Yes, I said. It's a tool, not a title. Do you have one in place? I do, I said, limited to situations I choose, with my sister Ruth as my agent, and with clear instructions. Do you want your son or daughter-in-law in that role? No, not now. Maybe someday if they learn to trust that no is not an insult. She smiled a little, then looked solemn again. Petition denied, she said, and then to Nate and his lawyer, guardianship is not a shortcut for control. It is a grave remedy for actual incapacity. What I see here is a competent woman with a family conflict. On the courthouse steps, the sun was so bright I had to squint. Nate kept his distance, fiddle-fingered the strap of his watch, then walked down without speaking. Kelsey stood beside him and didn't speak either. I didn't chase them. Some words have to sit in people's mouths until they taste them. We went to the diner because there should be pie after court. Not Maple Street this time. I wasn't looking to tangle memories. We tried the Sunrise in Yellow Springs, where the coffee is always strong and the slices are immodest. The waitress called us ladies, like we were out for a spree. What are we celebrating? She asked. Competence, I said. Lord, aren't we all? She said, and brought extra whipped cream like I'd ordered it. Fall bent the light into the good kind, and I spent mornings at the farmer's market and afternoons in the community garden pulling weeds while talking about nothing important with people I'd only recently met and somehow trusted more than I trusted my own narrative about myself. I wore a Menard's cap. Dot swears makes me look like a Democrat pretending not to be one. I bought mums for the porch and forgot to water them until they sulked. I watered them when I remembered. They rallied like stubborn people do. I started reading to second graders again because the teacher said their eyes go from lonely to lantern when someone older sits close and says a sentence in a different voice for every character. One boy named Max asked if post offices ever close because his mom says everything good does. I said, not if I can help it, and he nodded like he was building a list of things that stay. Thanksgiving came with a pitch in my throat that didn't leave until I took the first bite of Dot's cornbread stuffing. Bluebird Commons did a potluck. A man named Harold brought 3 kinds of cranberry sauce, canned with ridges, canned mashed, and a chilled relish with orange peel that made the tongues of people who think they don't like cranberries say, yes, please. We went around and said what we were grateful for, and when it got to me, I said, learning that no is a complete sentence if you say it with a period. And people clapped like they understood. December, I bought a stack of cards with deer on them and wrote to every person I'd leaned on and every person who had leaned on me. I sent one to Tanya that said, thank you for saving me from a future that didn't fit. And one to the APS worker that said, thank you for writing the right words. I wrote one to myself and tucked it behind the Pioneer Woman casserole dish in the cabinet where I keep the things I use when it matters. It said, you did not love less. You loved smarter. After New Year's, Ruth called to tell me her church friend's brother had a line on part-time work running a front desk at a retirement community 3 afternoons a week. You'd be good at welcoming people to a life they didn't expect but can still like, she said. So on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, I sat at a desk that smelled faintly of lemon oil and handed out name tags and directions to bingo, water aerobics, blood pressure checks, and a creative writing circle led by a woman who ran a newsroom in the 70s and still smokes menthols by the pond like the doctor will never catch her. I learned names fast because it's a gift I got from carrying other people's mail. I can remember where you live and the name of your dog, even if I only met you at the mailbox once in July. I kept a basket of cheap reading glasses by the sign-up sheets and a stash of Werthers in the drawer like a grandma in a storybook. It's possible to be the person you needed when you were younger. It's also possible to be the person you need now. In spring, I went to a concert at the high school because the volunteer coordinator put a flyer in my hand and said, "You look like someone who applauds when no one else knows they should." I chose the seat on the aisle because my knees prefer easy exits and because I like watching people slip in late like they're stealing something. Kelsey slid into a row across the way with Ava and Ben. She looked thinner. The kids waved. She gave a little half smile and didn't pretend we weren't there. After the show, I hugged Ava in the lobby and told her the bow on her dress looked like it had its own opinions. Kelsey said the bus line was reliable if you left 10 minutes earlier than you wanted to. "We're okay. We're getting okay," she said. Then whispered, "Do you still have pie?" Like pie was a secret he hoped we were still keeping. I wrote my address on Kelsey's palm with a pen and told her to come by Saturday afternoon when the light in my kitchen makes everything look kinder. They came. We ate lemon meringue at the table where I taught Nate fractions and where I decided I'd rather live alone than live in a family that treats love like a ledger. Nate left crumbs everywhere, and Ava wiped them into her hand like it mattered. Kelsey washed plates without my asking. We didn't talk about the townhouse or the court or remember the envelope at the diner. We talked about gym class and whether a cat counts as exercise if it sleeps on your lap and you have to adjust your breathing around its purr. When they left, Kelsey stood on the threshold like a person who didn't know whether to hug. I put a slice in foil and pressed it into her hand. I said, "Take this, not because you need it, because I like being the kind of woman who sends people home with good pie." Summer came again with thunderstorms so regular you could set a clock by the rumble. I sat on the porch with a book and watched the neighbors pretend they weren't hanging out laundry in the breaks. A cardinal moved into the maple outside my window and practiced yelling. Jeanette said male cardinals sing to mark their territory. "You know a thing or two about that now," she said, laughing. One night in July, a text from Nate lit my phone at 9:06 p.m. He wrote, "I got offered a foreman position. It's nights sometimes. Good money. No more chasing odd jobs." He added, "They said I had good references, and I think you'd laugh because one was the guy from the credit union who said I keep my appointments and my temper now." Then he wrote, "Thank you for not bailing me out so I could learn to do it myself." He didn't add a heart or a smiley face. He didn't have to. I slept with the windows open and the train sang and a wind chime somewhere up the road clinked like ice cubes in a glass. In the morning, I watered the basil that had gone to seed because I forgot to pinch it and poured bird seed into the feeder and wrote a grocery list that included nothing I didn't want to eat. I pulled a stack of volunteer flyers from my bag and circled two, one for a free tax prep clinic and one for reading to kids in the summer program at the library. On my 71st birthday, I went to the Sunrise Diner alone. The waitress from court remembered me. She asked, "Back to celebrate competence," half a grin. I ordered lemon meringue, and when she tried to give me the second slice half off, I said, "I'll pay full," and meant it down to my shoes. On the drive home, I took the long way and turned the radio up and sang badly because no one but me was going to hear it. The sky was the kind of blue that insults poets. The corn 2 counties over was high enough to whisper. When the light turned red at the edge of town, I thought of every paper I had mailed and every paper I had refused to sign, and felt the strangest thing. Not pride exactly, but a low hum under my ribs like a machine you finally found the on switch for. I pulled into Bluebird Commons and waved at Harold, lugging a bag of potting soil, at Marlene, walking in socks on the sidewalk like a kid, at Jeanette with paint on her elbow she hadn't noticed. I set the pie plate in the sink to soak, put the kettle on, and took the APS letter off the wall I had thumbtacked it a year ago. I slid it into the shoebox with my passport and my Social Security card and my trust documents, and then I sat at the table and wrote another letter. Not to Nate, not to Kelsey, not to anyone who might someday say I was selfish for holding on to my own life with both hands.
Dear Linda, you did not choose loneliness. You chose a new address for your love. You chose boundaries that let real love breathe. When someone tries to hand you control dressed as care, remember you can say no and still be good. When you bake, taste the filling before you pour it. When you drive, take the long way once in a while. When the neighbor kid leaves his scooter in your grass, remember he's trying to make his world bigger than the sidewalk.
You are not a credit line. You are not a backup plan. You are a woman with a bird feeder and a basil plant and a calendar you fill in pen because you're allowed to trust yourself. Pay full price for things you choose. Give away pie because it pleases you. Keep the porch light on, but install a lock. Love me. I folded the letter and put it on the fridge with a magnet shaped like a strawberry, clipped side out, because I like the way it looks, useful and small. Outside, the cardinal yelled like he owned the maple, and the wind shifted just enough to bring in the smell of somebody's laundry soap, clean and flat and good. Later, when Kelsey knocked with the kids, when she held up a bag with a mismatched set of coffee mugs from the thrift store, because we saw these and thought of you, when Ben darted in to check the bird feeder and Ava asked if we could try a pie with blueberries next time, I smiled and opened the door and stepped back, giving them room to enter and to leave. Space is love too. So is stepping into your own kitchen and offering what you have without emptying the cupboards. So is telling a story the way you live it now, not the way you wish it had gone. The kids climbed onto the chairs, elbows on the table, like etiquette is a game they'll learn when they're older. We talked about nothing important until it was, and when they left, I washed the plates and set them to dry like I always do, then stood in my quiet kitchen and breathed, deep, long, steady, like there was enough air for everybody.